Well, welcome to my little video on catching your own minnows and baitfish. Viewer discretion is advised. If you're a fly fishing purist or artificials only kind of guy, you're liable to find some real offensive pictures as we go along here. But if you're open-minded, might just help you catch more and bigger fish. At least we hope so. Over the course of the video, I'll be including some live video shots, but a lot of it is going to be like this one, which is just a picture from the past or some homemade information pages to help put things in perspective. But hope you like it and hope it helps. If you want to catch more and bigger fish, you got to pay attention to the fishy food chain, and that starts at the bottom with phytoplankton, which are microscopic plants like algae. They take the nutrients out of the water and convert them into a form that's usable by the larger species on up the line. Next in line is zooplankton, and zooplankton are either the larval forms of larger species or little aquatic invertebrates or whatever, but they further pass the nutrients up the line. Next in line are the small fish, which are either little full-size minnow fish or else the young of the year of larger fish. And at the top of the line, you've got the big fish, the apex predators, the ones that feed a lot on the smaller fish, and the ones that have concentrated the nutrients in a good form and help make bigger fish. Now, as we go through, we'll talk about using the small fish either live or dead or in pieces, and give suggestions for different uses for the different species. Where do you get your minnows and baitfish? Almost any water that has water year-round is likely to have something in it that's worth catching and using for bait. You got rivers, creeks, canals, ditches, other flowing waters. You got stillwater lakes, big and small. They're all over the country. Farm ponds, community lakes, golf course lakes. It's the old biblical system: seek and ye shall find, maybe. So whenever you're wandering around out in the back country, have a couple of minnow traps and a cast net and a rod and reel and a little bait, and don't be afraid to explore. Just be sure you're legal to fish where you're fishing and are catching the right species. Now, once we talk about minnows and baitfish, we'll be talking about using them dead or alive, whole or in pieces, filleted, strips, or whatever, and each of them has its own properties that make it best for one or another, depending on the species you're fishing for. Bait laws are different all over the country. Here in Utah, we can't even use or possess live bait fish. We can use dead minnows of several kinds, but if you've got a bucket with live minnows on it, you're liable to get busted. There are some protected species like dead Bonneville ciscos, yellow perch, white bass, species that can be used either whole or in pieces, but only in specific waters where they're naturally found. The other one is like shad from Lake Powell. You can use dead threadfin shad in Lake Powell, but you can't take them away from the lake and use them elsewhere. Lived in Arizona for quite a few years, and they're a lot more lenient in the species of bait fish they allow you to use. You can use a lot of different minnows. Almost every bait shop has 2 or 3 different kinds of minnows for sale. You can also use live sunfish. You can use live tilapia, live shad, threadfin or gizzard shad. You can also use live carp and goldfish. As I mentioned, goldfish are probably some of the best live bait there is for the big flathead cats in the lower Colorado River. California, lived and fished in California a lot, and they've got a big long list of fish and other aquatic goodies that can be used for bait in California. The only restrictions they have in a lot of cases is where you can't use some species. Might be a case of being able to use them only in the waters where you catch them. But as you travel around the country, you'll see a lot of bait shops that sell minnows. Some of them specialize in minnows, and most of their income comes from selling minnows. And a lot of the fishermen in the area rely on them heavily because that's where all their fishing is with live bait. If you go into a shop to buy some minnows, you usually have to take your own containers. But once you're in there, you can usually find several different kinds of minnows, and a lot of them are graded by size. So depending on what you're fishing for and where you're fishing, you can get the specific bait that's going to work best for you. This is me in my early years. Kid in Idaho. I was about 6 years old at that time. Caught a lot of nice trout out of a little stream that ran fairly close to our home on the outside of Idaho Falls. But there's also a lot of little minnows in there, and I actually spent more time playing around with the minnows, chubs and sucker minnows and little bullheads and dace and other species of minnows, and never did use them for bait though. And I was in town one day, happened to notice a big new bait shop. Went in there and they had a whole tank full of those minnows. I asked him what he was doing with those, and he said we sell them to guys that fish for big trout with them. And I said, well, I catch a lot of them, but I don't use them for bait. So he says, well, if you bring them in, bring live ones in to me, I'll give you 2 cents a piece for them. Well, that was the beginning of my first business adventure. But it was tough duty lugging a bucket full of water along the stream while I was catching little minnows one at a time with a fishing rod. It was even tougher getting that bucket full of water in my bicycle basket down to the bait shop. So finally, an older relative showed me how to make a minnow trap using wire screen and a couple of sticks to prop it open. And so I made that. And this wasn't the kind of a trap that you could throw out and leave and end up with a trap full of minnows after leaving it all night. You had to find some minnows, put some bait in it, throw it out, wait for the minnows to get in the trap, and then pull like crazy to keep them from getting out the front when you're bringing it in. But that did increase my income, and had a lot of fun using it. But about age 11, I moved out of Idaho to California, and that was the end of my minnowing career. But I did add a lot of fish to my fishing repertoire and a lot of waters to my angling resume, and also learned about a whole lot of other bait fish and how to catch them and how to use them. Okay, let's talk about some of the different species of minnows and bait fish. As you go around the country, there's a lot of different ones. There's shiners, chubs, fatheads, mosquito fish, dace, sculpins and bullheads, shad, cisco, perch, white bass, yellow bass, panfish, carp and goldfish, suckers, skipjack herring. We'll be talking about each of those individually as we go along. Probably one of the most popular bait fishes you'll find, especially for live minnows, are golden shiners. And this is about the size most guys prefer to use for bait. A little larger golden shiners are good for bigger fish like bigger bass, big walleyes, northern pike, big catfish. If you really want to catch some big largemouth bass down in Florida, then you take a big 10 to 12 inch golden shiner like this one and rig it up and chuck it out and hold on. In Utah, we can't use golden shiners. We can't even possess them, live or dead. But red sides are native to the state, so we can use red side shiners, and they work well. The only downside is once you freeze them, they turn soft and mushy. So if you're going to use them, catch them the day you're going to use them, kill them, and then use them fresh. And any of them you have left, you might as well throw them away because they won't be worth using if you freeze them. There's a few spot-tail shiners in Willard Bay Reservoir in Utah. Not a lot of them. They were planted in there at one time to provide a forage base. Fathead minnows are found all over the United States, basically. They don't get big. They're only 2 to 3 inches long, but they're very good for some of the smaller species, like fishing for crappie or yellow perch or other small fish that like minnows. Like the red side shiners, though, they have a downside in that if you freeze them, they get soft. So plan on catching them and using them the same day you catch them. I use a lot of chubs here in Utah, and this is what my favorite chub pond looks like when I walk up to the edge and look down on a good day. And when it's looking like that, it's pretty easy to make a good size haul with a few throws of a cast net. These are mixed sizes. I usually separate them out and use them by size. Now, chubs do get big. This is about a 15-incher that I caught while fishing for other species with a lure. I've caught them up to 18 inches. But the best bait size, the ones I prefer, are the 2 to 3 inch size, and some up to 3 to 4 inches, although I do use bigger ones. Now, the smaller size, you can use them whole, just on a hook. You can cut them up into pieces. You can use them to tip jigs, either whole or in pieces. So there's a lot of things you can do with the smaller ones. Bigger size, 5 to 7 inches. They make good bait for big catfish, big walleyes, northern pike, and in some lakes like Bear Lake, they use them this size for big cutthroats and big lake trout. And if you're catching the bigger ones and you need some smaller baits, what a lot of guys do is they'll freeze the big ones whole, cut them into chunks, and then tip them over sideways and using a sharp knife, cut down through the chunks to make 2 bait strips. Put them back in the freezer, freeze them, and keep them frozen until you're ready to go fishing, and then use the little strips to tip your jigs, especially for ice fishing. Dace are found around the country in different places. With their color and their size and shape, they're ideal for a lot of species wherever you can find them. Ditto for sculpins. They don't school up. You find one here and one there. They hang out on the bottoms of streams and lakes, flitting around under the rocks. But if you can catch a few, they're really good bait for big trout for sure. A lot of places around the country, the threadfin shad is kind of the mainstay of the fishery, mostly in the warmer climate lakes in the south, because they don't tolerate cold water very well in the winter. But wherever they live, they're abundant, and they get up to about 4, 5, 6 inches, which is perfect for a lot of fish. Now, they're not legal to use in Utah, except you can use some dead in Lake Powell, but you can't take them away from the lake. Now, when I lived down in Arizona, almost every trip began with going out and getting a couple of netfuls of threadfin shad, and then the rest of the day spent taking bass and catfish and walleye and other fish off your line, because things really did work well. Gizzard shad get a lot bigger than threadfin shad. They can also tolerate colder water. So you'll find a few of those in some of the northern lakes where there aren't any threadfin shad, but they get big. They get up to maybe 20 inches or so, weigh 3 or 4 pounds. And when they get this big, about the only way you can use them is cut them up into chunks and use them for big catfish. But they have a prolonged spawn in the spring, and by late fall, you'll find several different sizes of them swimming around. And if you're using a cast net to get your bait where legal, the 2 smaller sizes are still great to use for bait, even though you might not do well on the larger ones. Here in Utah, we've got another species that's legal to catch and use for bait. That's the Bonneville Cisco. Those are found only in Bear Lake, and you can keep a limit of 30 of them. Most guys that do catch a limit usually keep some or all of them to use for bait, because you can use them whole or in chunks to catch big lake trout and big cutthroats. But you have to catch them usually in January each year when they come around the shoreline to spawn. Otherwise, they're out really deep. Only problem is in January, a lot of years you'll find ice. So you have to break your way out through the ice and then dip the Ciscos out of shallow water in the ice. But those that do it say it's well worth it. Now, you can also catch some through the ice later on when they're out over the rock pile by vertical jigging with jigs down in deeper water. And they will hit small lures, and a lot of them are snagged, and it's legal to snag them here in Utah. But however you want to get them. Here's a whole food chain in one picture. Perch that just barfed up a baby perch that it ate. Chances are it even spawned that perch earlier in the year. Now, baby perch are really good to use for bait, but here in Utah, when they swarm in the shallows in the late summer, you can't net them with a basket or a cast net. But if you happen to catch another fish that barfs one up, you can put it on the hook and throw it back out and catch more fish with it. I prefer a lot of times just to take a small perch, fillet it, and cut it into strips, and use a perch meat strip. Sometimes that works almost as well as using a whole dead baby perch. Baby white bass are the same as small perch. You can't net them. or get them otherwise, but they will hit small jigs, and if you catch one this size, it's really a good size to use for big catfish, or you can cut it up into chunks or strips for tipping jigs. Same with small yellow bass. They're a member of the same family. Bluegill are a great bait fish. You can use them live or dead, whole or cut up into pieces. And smaller 2, 3, 4-inch sizes, they make great bait for bass or catfish, live or dead. But in a size like this, you hook up a live one and throw it out there at night, and you're liable to catch some pretty good sized flathead cats on them. They love them. Flathead candy. Ditto for green sunfish. Almost any predator in the lake will eat green sunfish of any size. Green sunfish don't school up like the bluegills do, so you catch one here and one there. You don't catch big masses of them, but wherever you can find them, you make good for bait, either whole or again or cut up into pieces. Crappie. This is a pretty small one here. You very seldom see them this size, but once in a while they show up in a cast net or a minnow trap. And if you get one this size, and if they're legal to use for bait, put them on there, you catch some nice big bass and cats on them. Wherever there are carp in the lake or river, they spawn in the spring early when the water gets about 60, 65 degrees. And by late summer, you'll find big schools of them swimming around the edges trying to stay away from the predators. Now, that makes them real easy targets. One good throw of a cast net, you can get a whole lot of bait. But late in the year, since the carp have a prolonged spawn over several weeks' time, you're liable to catch several different sized carp in the same net throw. Good policy is to separate them out by size and then freeze them up. And then when you get ready to go fishing, just take the size for the fish that you're after in the water that you're fishing in. It's usually a good idea to take a couple of sizes just in case you guess wrong. If you really want to catch some big cats, use carp about this size, 5, 6, 7 inches, live or dead. If you want to fish for flatheads, best to use them live. These carp in the picture look kind of funny. They're what are called mirror carp. They only have a few big scales on them instead of all the small scales that the regular carp use, but mirror carp or regular carp both work very well for big cats. A lot of people like to cut carp fillets up into strips to use for catfish bait. I do too. This particular picture, I'm leaving the skin on them. Now, the skin makes it possible that if you run the hook through them, they almost never come off the hook, even when you want them to. It takes an act of Congress to get them back off the hook with that tough skin, but they do work. I prefer to skin the fillets before I cut them up into strips or chunks. And the carp meat is firm enough that it stays on the hook very well, even without the skin. One of the members of the carp family is the goldfish. And the small sizes like this, if you can buy them live, they make good bait for big bass and catfish. Down the lower Colorado River of Arizona and California, guys down there use big goldfish, 7, 8, 9, 10 inches long, fishing for the big flatheads down below the dams. And even though the flatheads are mostly nocturnal feeders, that bright orange color on the goldfish will sometimes even wake them up during the daytime, so they're a good all day bait for big catfish. Wherever you find suckers in a lake or stream, they spawn in the spring, and by summer you'll be finding schools of these baby suckers. And believe me, every predator in the lake eats baby suckers, so they're really good to catch and use for bait. If you want to catch bigger fish on suckers, like northern pike, big catfish, stripers, any fish that's big enough to eat them this size, the mid-sized ones are good to use for bait with a big hook. You can even use them for small muskies. But if you want a big muskie, use a big sucker and rig it up with a multiple hook rig. Make sure your leaders are steel leaders, and you got a heavy rod, because a 50, 60-pound muskie is going to give you the fight of your life. Last on the list of bait fish usable around the United States are the skipjack herring. Now, these are found almost exclusively in the Mississippi River drainage, mostly in the eastern part of the country. But wherever you can find them, they're great to use whole or cut up into pieces. catch a lot of catfish, stripers, wipers, any other big fish that eats fish. They've got a good oily flesh and a really good scent, so they're pretty good bait fish. That about does it for the species. Okay, we've talked about the different species of bait fish and minnows. Let's talk about how to get some. First of all, of course, you can use hook or line, especially for the bigger ones, but you can also catch a lot of minnows on hook and line. Use either bait, lures, or flies. We'll talk about each of those individually. And then there's the minnow basket or minnow trap, very popular. Several different kinds of nets like dip nets, cast nets, and seines, and we'll talk about all of those. Let's talk about hook and line first. Plain old hook and a piece of bait, with or without weight, will catch you a lot of bait fish. If you need to fish above the bottom or suspended somewhere below the top, a bobber or a slip bobber is the way to go. If you're fishing right on the bottom from shore or a boat, you can use a drop shot, either a single or a double hook rig. You can use small jigs, which I will get into some that I make. You can use those fish from single or double or even triple in some states. And there's a sabiki rig, which is a multi-hook rig used in saltwater to catch multiple bait fish. Legal in some freshwater areas. Flies are always good, both for the big ones and the small ones. And you can catch them on a fly rod or using a bubble on a fly. We'll talk about each of those individually. Let's talk about drop shot rig. A lot of people aren't familiar with those. They think it's only for bass fishermen, but it works really good for minnowing also, whether you're fishing from the shore or from a boat or float tube or whatever. Helps you get right down to the bottom if that's where the fish are, and maintain good contact with the bottom, feel what's going on. If you've got a lot of bait fish in the area, you want to catch doubles, put two hooks on there and catch two at a time. Not uncommon at all. If you got a fish somewhere between the top and the bottom, either because the bottom's all covered with snags or because the minnows are suspending somewhere between top and bottom, then use a bobber. Either a little white, red and white plastic bobber or a fancier slip bobber if you need to get a little bit deeper. Takes a little bit more hassle to rig a slip bobber, but sometimes it can really be worth it. Here's the rig that I use. This is taken out of one of the videos that I'll be showing shortly. Shows that I'm using a light rod, light line, using a little small, about a 1-inch bobber, about a 3 to 4 foot length of line between the bobber and a small jig. And then on the small jig, I've got a piece of worm that holds it above the bottom, and a big school of chubs there. When they're a big school of chubs are usually a lot more competitive, and so bites come pretty fast. You'll see that on the video. This is what happens when I hook one. Bring it on up. You can see the bobber, about 3 to 4 feet of line, a little white jig with a piece of worm on it, and a chub. It does work, by golly. These are some of the little chub jigs that I make. Call them bait bugs because they're designed to be used with a piece of bait. You can use worm, a little piece of dough. You can use gulp minnow, power bait, anything that works to put a little flavor in the water as well as just the color of the jig. Here's my wife with a couple of chubs she caught on a little tandem jig rig. And again, when the chubs are thick in there, they're very competitive, and it's not unusual at all to catch doubles. Sabiki rig, again, is a saltwater rig designed for catching saltwater fish, but here in Utah, it's only legal to use 3 hooks at a time, so we can't use those. This is what it looks like in saltwater, a 6-hook sabiki rig with 6 bait fish and 1 drop. That's a good way to load up your bait in a hurry. Fly fishing is a great way to catch minnows and bait fish. It's a lot of fun and very productive. A lot of times you'll see them eating bugs off the surface. You can use a dry fly, but in most cases, just any kind of a little nymph will work fine. You can use it as is, or put a little piece of worm on it if you want to sweeten it up a little bit. Now, if you're not good with a fly rod, use a bubble and a fly rig like you use for fishing trout up in the mountain lakes. Use a bubble about anywhere from 2 to 6 feet a leader, and whatever fly you're going to use. That'll work very well. Now, if you're fishing on the bottom in a little deeper water, and that's where the minnows are holding, then put a sinker on the end of your line and a couple of little flies on a dropper, and again, with or without a piece of worm on the fly, but this will help you to work it on the bottom very effectively and catch 2 at a time if they're really active. Okay, now we're going to talk about how to catch minnows on a fishing pole using a little bobber and a jig rig, about 3 feet of line under the bobber to keep it out of the moss and the weeds on the bottom. First thing you do is make a little cast out where the fish are. See how little chub's swimming around. Watch the bobber as soon as it goes in there. Give it a rod twitch. You don't have to use a bill dance hook set in order to set the hook. And bring it on up. Take a look at it. Make sure it's about the right size. Not a rod breaker. A good bait fish. Take it off the jig hook. Put the first one in the bucket. Get ready to throw back out. Throw back out where the fish are. Now this time we're going to get a couple of hits without setting the hook. But again, you don't use a big jerk. You just kind of twitch the rod. And when it gets back in close to the reeds, bring it in out of the way and cast back out. Now, we only fished a little over a minute. Here in a second, we'll catch the second fish. This isn't a way to catch rod breakers or set world records, but it's a lot of fun way to catch minnows. There's another one coming in. It's only a little over a minute of fishing time, and we've got 2 minnows, so that's not bad. One of the best ways to catch minnows is with a good old minnow trap, or minnow basket, whatever you want to call it. These come in a lot of different shapes: round, square, long, cylindrical, come in glass, mesh, whole bunch of different ways they come. I'll be talking about my favorites and how to use them. If you get the metal ones, they'll either be shiny metal or black painted, or you can paint your own in whatever color you want. I'll be showing you how I paint mine green. You can throw these out from shore. You can drop them down from a boat or a float tube if you're afloat. And you can fish them right on the bottom, or you can put a float on the top and suspend them somewhere between top and the bottom, depending on where your targeted bait fish are holding. And as far as bait that you put inside the trap, you got to get something to attract them to come inside. Plain old crumbled up bread works just as good as anything, but I usually like to put about a cup of dry dog food in there too. It gives it a little extra flavor and color and contrast. So, but you'll find your own best combination after some experimentation. This is what the round minnow traps look like that I prefer. They come apart, fold up, stack together, so you can carry a couple of them at a time without taking up a lot of room in your trunk of your car. And again, they're either painted black or bright metal mostly. Some guys swear by the bright metal, say it attracts more. Some guys like the black. I like to paint mine green, and we all have our own preferences, and they all work at one time or another. The one thing to be sure of when you put those two halves together is always use that fastener and make sure it's securely fastened before you throw your net out in the water. Otherwise, you're going to bring in only half a basket or no basket at all, and that doesn't get you very many minnows. This is what my painted green one looks like, with the bait on the inside and all the minnows swarming around both inside and outside. You can see I've already got some in there. This is what it looks like when I bring them in and open up the basket for dumping into my bucket. You can see the minnows of different sizes and some leftover dog food and bread. Okay, if you're going out minnow trapping, best thing to do is do your baiting on the tailgate of your car or your pickup before you go out. Makes it a lot easier because you got an elevated surface. And got my component parts here. You can see the bucket that I carry the 2 traps in, nested together. On the right, you can see the line spool that I use works like a spinning reel. hold on to one end, and when you throw the trap it peels off just like a spinning reel. And the first thing you do is you go ahead and take the two traps out, and then one at a time you load them up with the bait. That shows you the close-up of the spinning reel. Take those apart. Now any two parts of a minnow basket will fit together. You don't need any special measurements. Okay, now you can either bring a bottle with a bunch of dried dog food in it and a partial loaf of bread, or you can pre-measure it in advance, keep it in a little plastic bag. There's what I use for dog food. Almost any dry dog food will work. It just puts some extra scent and color in the water. And then some pre-crumbed up slices of bread. You can use white bread, brown bread, any kind of bread you want. They all work. Next step is putting the two halves of the basket together. Goes together very well if you're coordinated. Otherwise, might take a little work. They do fit together. And then you bring the two single loops together and bring your line clip that holds those two together. And it's critically important that you have that line clip on very securely. Rotate it around a couple of times to make sure it holds. Otherwise, when you bring your basket back in, you may only have a half a basket or no basket at all. And that really doesn't get you a lot of minnows. Okay, now let's talk about throwing out some minnow baskets and getting some minnows. Starts with taking the line off of the throwing spool, because if you're throwing at a long distance, it can bind up and it can mess up your cast, and you have to do it 2 or 3 times till you get it right. So if you strip the line off and lay it in loose coils on the rock, it's going to flow a lot better when you throw that basket. Then you get into position, pick out the spot where you want the basket, line it up, swing the basket a few times on the right line, let her go, using the line, holding the line to get it to drop right where you want it, letting it settle to the bottom where you want it, and setting down the line and play the waiting game. The last part of using a minnow trap is bringing the thing in after you've had it set for a while and hope you've got a few minnows in there. So first thing you do is give it a haul to get it up over the rocks and the weeds. See a few minnows down there, so hopefully we've got some in the basket. So get it over the rocks and the weeds, try to avoid snagging it up. Pull it slowly up around the rock ledge if you're throwing off a rock ledge like I am here. Okay, now you're ready to take it apart, get the minnows out. The first thing you do is undo the clip. If you've done a good job, the clip's still in place. Once the clip's off, then you take the basket apart. It takes just as much coordination as putting it together in the first place. But you get the basket apart, then you dump it out into, I like a little strainer like this that first of all drains off any moisture and makes it a lot easier for separating the minnows out of the leftover bait when you're putting them in the bucket. Okay, take the strainer and get whatever weeds out that you can. Let's just start scooping the minnows into the bucket. Try not to throw too many of them out of the bucket like I do. And it looks like we probably got about a couple of dozen minnows, which makes for a good throw. There are times that I've gotten a lot more, and there's times I've gotten a lot less. Then when you're finally through, you'll have some leftover bait in there. You can either put that back in the basket and fish it again, or just throw it out to the minnows out there and let them have the rest of it. Now let's talk about some of the nets that you can use to catch minnows and bait fish. There's a lot of different ones available, but I prefer either dip nets or seines or cast nets. Probably use cast nets more than anything myself, but there are times and places where the others will all work well. Dip net is basically a long handle net with a big scoop, and that's good for hand scooping minnows out of either a stream or a lake, wherever you find multiple targets. The only difference like in Utah, we have a maximum size opening of 18 inches. So wherever you use one, make sure you're using one that's legal size to use. This is the proclamation from Utah that shows 18 inches for fishing in Bear Lake for the Cisco's up there, but it also applies to the other fish. You can also use a handheld dip net to take the crayfish and non-game species, except prohibited fish. So again, if you use a dip net, make sure it's legal in the waters that you're fishing and for the species that you're after. Dip nets are really good with a small mesh if you want to get a bunch of small minnows, and sometimes these are good for tipping jigs for smaller fish or for ice fishing. But this is just an illustration that a small mesh net will catch a lot of small fish. But you can use as big a mesh net as you want depending on what you're after. Up in Bear Lake, the mesh we use on the dip nets is fairly large because these Cisco's are a little bit larger, as you can see. And they're a lot of fun to catch with the dip net. Seines and cast nets. In Utah, these are both limited to 10 feet maximum in length or width. Now with a cast net, that means that's a 5-foot radius. So if you're buying online, be sure you get a 5-foot radius, not a 10-foot radius. Seines are stretches of net strung between two poles and dragged across the bottom either in a stream or a lake to herd minnows or other bait into where you can scoop them out with the net. Now, if you're only a single person using a seine net, you can use a smaller one very effectively. If you're using a longer one, it's better to have 2 people working it. And some states have different regulations, so you can use longer nets depending on the species that you're after and the water you're fishing. Cast net, several different parts to a cast net. Obviously, there's the mesh, which traps the fish, the lead line around the outside of the net, which is what helps with casting and also sinking the net at a good speed so it'll trap the minnows inside. You've got to be concerned about the radius and the diameter. The diameter maximum in Utah is 10 feet. That means the maximum radius will be 5 feet. In addition to the lead line, you've got the braille lines, which are usually monofilament, coming down through that plastic yoke at the top. And they go down to the net. And after you finish casting the net and you make a haul on the hand line, that pulls those braille lines and closes up the bottom of the net and traps the minnows on the inside. Hand line should be long enough to reach the distances you need to reach with your cast net. And in most cases, you won't need anything longer than about 20 to 25 feet. So don't go overboard on it. And then it should have a loop on the end for looping over your hand and your wrist so that you don't make a cast and end up losing the whole rig out there. Cast net basics, things to consider, again, are the size options. You can find online if you're buying them. You can find anywhere from a radius of 3 feet to 12 feet. 12 feet are the great big saltwater cast nets. 3 feet are about a 6-foot wide net, which is pretty much too small for most efficient minnowing. Mesh size options anywhere from 3/16 inches to 1 inch. 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch is what I use for most of my minnowing. 1/4 inch will get me more of the small minnows. 3/8 of an inch is for anything 3 or 4 inches or larger. The weights, you've got an option on the weights, usually anywhere from 3/4 of a pound to 1.5 pounds per radius foot. Now, weight comes into it in 2 ways. Number one, if you're fishing deeper water and you need a faster sink rate, you'll need more weight per foot. But the more weight you've got on there, the harder the thing is to cast. So it might take a little experimentation to get the balance right for you. Net materials, probably most of the nets that most guys use are made out of monofilament. And they work just fine, except they're a little bit stiff, and it's a good idea to soak them in hot water for a half hour to an hour before you use them to loosen them up so that they cast more easily. The nylon cord ones, they're fairly soft. In fact, a lot of them are sold under the name Easy Cast because you can just take them right out of the bucket and make a cast with them without soaking them. If you need instructions and practice, a lot of things online. Go to YouTube and look up a video on the size of the net you'll be using and make some notes and go out and practice. Cleaning, care, and storage. The better care you take of your net, keep it clean, store it properly, the longer it'll last, and the better job it'll do for you. This is a quick scan list of the bait sizes versus mesh size. Again, coming down to the second column, I keep a lot of fish in the 2 to 3 inch range, a lot of minnows, so I'm using a 1/4 inch nest for most of my minnowing. However, I do catch some 3 to 6 inches, so I also have a net in a 3/8 size, but I use the smaller one most. But there's no law that says you can't have more than one, so if you fish multiple waters for multiple species of multiple sizes, you might want to have more than one net. These are some 3 to 5 inch red side shiners from Electric Lake in Utah, and a 3/8 inch mesh monofilament net. Work just fine. Here's a 1/4 inch mesh mono net and some 2 to 3 inch chub minnows, and that worked just fine. Here's the net I'm currently using, which is a 5-foot radius 1/4 inch mesh soft nylon net. Taking it right out of the bucket for the first time on the day. And you can see it hangs nice and straight and soft, ready to cast without pre-soaking. Just for grins, this is a big saltwater net being thrown. Now, it's not as hard to throw them as it is to fold them up properly so that when you throw them, they'll unfurl in the right configuration. If you don't prep them right, when you throw, it'll just be a big glob on the water. But once you get the hang of it, they're not all that hard. Here's one probably in the 14 to 16 foot range being thrown off the end of a boat. And that's how a lot of guys use them, is just throw them off the bow of the boat. If you've got a very sturdy kayak, you can throw one off the end of a kayak. I suppose there are guys that could probably get by throwing them off a stand-up paddleboard too. Don't know if I'd try it. I'd probably end up in the water. If it's legal and they don't prohibit it, a good place to throw a net is around a dock. Usually a lot of minnows and small bait fish around a dock. But again, be sure you check the regulations, make sure you're legal, otherwise you're liable to get busted. If you live in a developed community, and there's a developed community lake, you can walk around the concrete edge and throw the net out from there. Just be careful, as you can see in the picture, there are some rocks in close to shore, so you want to be sure to throw your net beyond the rocks and to drag it up quickly out of there so you don't snag the rocks, otherwise you'll be leaving your net behind. Now, before you ever take your net to the water, you ought to get out and practice a little bit first on some green grass. If you got a big enough backyard, that's a good place to go, but otherwise, school or a playground or someplace like that, a park. But get used to getting the rhythm and being able to throw the net so it lands in a nice circle as many times as possible. And while you're out practicing, watch out for kids and dogs. When you can finally get your net to drop in a nice circle like this most of the time, then you'll be ready to go to the water. Now, we'll be showing some of this stuff on video, but as a quick reference, here are the step-by-steps on what to do with a 5-foot radius net. Number 1, clench a rope around your right wrist, and then coil it around your throwing hand. Number 2, hold the net at your side, resting the weights on the ground. Grab the net with your throwing hand at pocket height, that's about 3 to 4 feet. Grasp the lead line, reach down and grab that with your left hand, your free hand, at a position straight down from the end of your right thumb and place it between your thumb and forefinger and then hold it in place. Next, grasp the lead line with your free hand at a position about an arm's length from your other hand. Now, this will open the net about a quarter of the way open, and you should now be loaded and ready to cast. Next, rotate your body back to the right 1/4 turn and immediately rotate back to your left, releasing the net at about a 30-degree angle into the air in the direction of your target. Kind of like throwing a frisbee. You want it to throw it in a circle. If you're throwing it right, the net should hit the water in a circular form and should sink down and catch a whole bunch of minnows. Now, finishing it up, once the net is sunk to the desired depth, give a hard pull on the throw line to close the net, and then haul it back into shore. Once it's back into shore, grab the horn, release the throw line to empty the net into the bucket or the bait well. Clean out all the sticks and debris and birds and weeds and stones and anything else you've got in the net while you're emptying it. And clean it out, otherwise your net will collapse and make a poor throw unless you clean it out properly before throwing it again. Cast net care. If you've got monofilament net, be sure to soak it in warm water for a half hour to an hour before you use it. It'll throw it a lot better. Avoid snaggy bottoms. If you don't know what's on the bottom when you're getting ready to throw the net, don't throw. If you don't know, don't throw. That'll save you a lot of lost nets or ripped nets. If you have snagged up a little bit and pull it in, check your net for holes or other damage, and repair it if you can. If not, you might have to replace your net. Clean and wash your net after every use, and hang it to dry upright. Let it dry out thoroughly, and once it's dry, store it dry in a clean, dry, cool area. Take good care of your net and it'll last a lot longer and give you a lot better use. Okay, now let's see how to throw this cast net. First, loop the cord around your wrist securely so you don't lose it when you throw it. Coil up the rope in a few coils for release. Then pull the net up out of the bucket. This is a new easy cast net that you don't have to pre-soak. Grab it about 3 feet up from the lead line. Grab one edge of the lead line, bring it up and hold it with your throwing hand. Go down about another 3 or 4 feet, grab the lead line again. That holds the net open so that it'll open up when you give it a fling. Go back to the right and almost immediately throw out kind of a frisbee throw. If you do it right, it lands in a nice circle. Let it settle to the bottom. Haul on it hard to close up the bottom of the net and trap the minnows. Bring them all in and hope it's not too messed up with a lot of weeds. Now you're ready to clean it out. Clean out the net, get all the minnows out of it. Start out by dropping the bottom of the lead line into the bucket. Grab the yoke and pull it straight up to straighten the net out. And give it a few shakes and wiggles and flips to get the minnows that are in the upper part of the net down into the lower part of the net and into the bucket. Work your way down and grab one edge of the lead line and start pulling it out of the bucket by the lead line just a few inches at a time, cleaning it off as you go. You want to be sure you get all the weeds and sticks and debris in the net out of there before you throw it the next time, or else it's going to collapse on you. This is just kind of a rough clean out here, making sure that all the minnows get in the bucket and that you get out as many of the weeds as possible while you're going. As you can see, we did get a few minnows. That was a worthwhile throw. That's probably a couple of dozen in there. Okay, and that pretty much completes the initial clean out. Okay, now for the final cleanup after the throw and get ready to make the next throw. Make sure, grab hold of the lead line and work it around. Make sure there aren't any tangles in there that are going to mess you up when you throw. And once you're assured of that, do the same thing. Grab the lead line, hold one end in the throwing hand, reach down, get another piece of it, getting ready to throw. And now you're ready to make another throw. Well, that's the end of the little video on minnows and baitfish. Hope you liked it. Just in case you're interested, I have another video out somewhere on YouTube on freezing minnows, sorting and freezing them. And in the future, I plan to put one together on how to fish different kinds of minnows and baitfish, how to cut them up, how to use them, how to put them on the hook, and all that good stuff. But anything else you'd like, let me know by replying on my YouTube, and I'll be happy to accommodate you if I can. Thanks.